What if I told you one of the deadliest events in human history did something almost no one would expect? It didn't just kill people, it changed the price of labor. It changed who had power, and in some parts of Europe, it helped turn a broken feudal world into a far richer one. Not overnight, not evenly, but enough to rewrite history. The Black Death hit Europe from 1347 to 1353, and historians still debate the exact death toll. Many place it around a third of the population, while some reconstructions push the number much higher, even to around 50% in Western Europe and as high as 60% in Europe as a whole. Before the plague, Europe was already under pressure. Land was tight, food was scarce, workers had little bargaining power. Most people lived close to the edge, and most wealth flowed upward to landowners and elites. Then the plague arrived and ripped through that system like a fire through dry grass. The key thing is this: plague destroyed people, but it did not destroy land, tools, buildings, or livestock. So the moment the population crashed, the balance of power shifted hard toward survivors. That is the whole story in one sentence. Fewer workers, same amount of land. So now imagine you're a lord with fields that still need planting, harvesting, and repairing, but half your labor force is gone. Suddenly, the person holding the plow has something new: leverage. Historians describe this as a severe labor shortage that weakened serfdom and gave surviving workers more room to move, bargain, and demand better terms. In England, researchers find that wages rose after the plague and that employers often had to sweeten pay with extra food and clothing just to keep workers. And here is where the story gets even more interesting.
The ruling class did what ruling classes always do when workers get stronger. They tried to stop it. England responded with laws that capped wages and restricted labor mobility. The famous Statute of Laborers in 1351 was designed to hold wages near pre-plague levels and prevent workers from moving around looking for better pay. In other words, the government tried to freeze the old world in place, even though the old world had already been shattered. But you cannot legislate away scarcity. When labor is rare, labor gets expensive. Research on medieval English wages finds that after the plague, wages rose sharply in cash terms. One economic history summary reports increases of about 12% to 28% from the 1340s to the 1350s and 20% to 40% by the 1360s. Other research finds that for certain laborers, the big wage increase took longer to show up, but the overall direction was clear. The plague changed the labor market, and workers eventually won more money and better conditions. That matters because money is only half the story. If wages go up and prices go down, people get richer in real life, not just on paper. That is exactly what happened in many places. After the Black Death, prices for food, goods, and housing fell in some regions, while real wages rose to levels not seen again until much later. One study on post-plague London and England describes this as a major redistribution of wealth. Survivors could eat better, live better, and breathe a little easier. This is where the old feudal order starts to crack. Feudalism depended on people being stuck on the land, stuck in their class, stuck in relationships where labor was abundant and cheap. But after the plague, workers could move more freely because there were fewer of them. Employers had to compete for their labor. That competition slowly weakened the old system. It did not erase hierarchy, but it gave ordinary people more power than they had ever had before.
And it was not identical everywhere. England is the clearest example of wage pressure and rising labor value, but the broader European picture was more mixed. A major study comparing regions finds that in England, real wages rose strongly after the plague, while per capita GDP rose more modestly at first because trade disruptions and falling market activity held some growth back.
In northern Italy, both real wages and per capita GDP rose after the Black Death. In Spain, the pattern was different again. So this was not one neat universal economic miracle. It was a shock that pushed different regions in different directions. Still, the long-run effect in some places was powerful. Take Tuscany. Research on Florentine inequality finds that a phase of declining inequality lasting about a century was triggered by the Black Death. That does not mean society became fair. It did not. But it does mean the catastrophe temporarily compressed wealth gaps. More people died, so land and property were divided among fewer survivors. The result was a society that was, in the words of one study, both more egalitarian and richer. Now pause on that for a second. More egalitarian and richer. That sounds impossible until you see the mechanism. When a huge share of the population disappears, the surviving workers inherit more bargaining power, and the surviving households inherit a larger share of resources. That means more spending power, more consumer demand, and more money moving through markets instead of sitting still in the hands of a tiny elite. It is one reason historians and economists keep coming back to the Black Death when they talk about the rise of market society. And this is where the Renaissance angle comes in. People love to tell the Renaissance as a story of genius, painters, architects, patrons, and cities suddenly glowing with brilliance. And yes, that happened. But behind the art was money. Behind the money was trade. Behind the trade was a labor market transformed by plague. One major economic study notes that northern Italy was already perhaps the richest economy in the world before the Black Death, and that after the plague, real wages and per capita GDP rose there too. In other words, the plague did not magically invent wealth, but it helped rearrange who controlled it and how it moved.
That rearrangement is the key. When labor becomes more expensive, landlords cannot rely on pure force forever. They have to bargain, they have to innovate, they have to look for ways to make production more efficient, to attract workers, to organize capital differently, and to profit from trade rather than simply squeezing peasants harder. That is one of the quiet beginnings of a more modern economy. Not a clean break, but a slow shift from land domination toward wage bargaining, mobility, and markets. And the cruel irony is this: the same plague that killed millions also made the survivors harder to control. They could demand more, they could move more, they could earn more, they could eat better, they could own more. And once that starts, society does not go back to exactly what it was before. The Black Death did not create capitalism by itself, and it did not make Europe rich in some simple automatic way. But it smashed the old labor balance, raised the value of work, weakened serfdom, and helped push parts of Europe toward a more commercial, more mobile, more money-driven world. That world would eventually feed the Renaissance and much later modern capitalism. So the real lesson is not that a plague is good. It is that history is full of brutal shocks that do not just destroy systems, they expose them. And when the Black Death tore through Europe, it exposed a hard truth. The old order only looked permanent because labor was cheap enough to keep everyone in place. The moment labor became scarce, everything changed.